Hello friends, and welcome to another video. Today is another installment in my series Aesthetics Explored, and the aesthetic today is cottagecore, which is also one of the most requested videos on this channel. So, the first question to ask is obviously, what is cottagecore? Similarly to dark academia, cottagecore originated on Tumblr, and is at its core a rustic and rural aesthetic. Cottagecore is an aesthetic based around the concept of living in a rural cottage, baking for yourself, and possibly even growing your own food and making your own clothes. It's very much like a pastel version of Little House on the Prairie, and due to the ever-expanding urban world most people tend to live in, the escapist idea of getting to live in an adorable little cottage and be totally autonomous is suddenly really appealing to people. Arguably, cottagecore is even more popular than dark academia nowadays, and is part of an ever-growing community. You can find entire sites dedicated to selling clothes and accessories that fit the aesthetic. TikTok accounts show off baking and making tea in their cute cottagecore kitchens, and teenagers use the term as part of their daily vocabulary. While it did originate on Tumblr, the appeal of the aesthetic has allowed it to exit the Tumblr sphere and get really big on other platforms like Instagram and TikTok. At least part of this popularisation is due to the LGBT community, specifically lesbians, making the cottagecore aesthetic part of the gay community and young lesbian aesthetic. I cannot tell you how many adorable videos I have seen on TikTok of young lesbians or bi girls talking about how they want to move to the countryside and live in a cottage with 3 cats and their wife. Due in part to the popularity amongst the gay community and the escapist fantasy, cottagecore is now one of the most popular aesthetics with a growing fan base. So, what does it look like? The aesthetic on paper involves vintage crockery, farmhouses, dried herbs and tea, baking, wildflower fields, fairies, and gardens. Many people just starting to discover the aesthetic will be greeted by pages and pages of photos like this, often with a more pastel or vintage grain over them. However, the meat and bones of the aesthetic and how most people tend to express it is through their clothing. According to the cottagecore wiki, the clothing in the aesthetic is heavily inspired by 1900 to 1950 styles and consists of frilly dresses and floofy shirts. In my experience, it seems to be a combination of the early 19th century, Edwardian, and mid-20th century, including aspects like gingham, lace, aprons, and embroidery. It is loose and full of pastel colours designed to be comfortable and practical. Accessories are simple, and shoes are vintage and practical. It does tend towards summer and spring for the styles, however it does also encourage layering, which is fantastic because it means cloaks are making a comeback, and cloaks should never have gone out of style in the first place. While the colour palette is more pastel and light overall, I've definitely seen influencers and cottagecore enthusiasts with a more rustic, almost hobbit-like palette. The influences on this aesthetic definitely come in part from Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Little House on the Prairie, Studio Ghibli films, books like Little Women and Pride and Prejudice, and music like Girl in Red and Cave Town. There's also something to be said for the similarities of cottagecore to the soft girl and general vintage aesthetics, both of which are very popular both on Tumblr and on other platforms, which have probably allowed it to emerge from the general Tumblr sphere that it was born into. Now that we've got all the information out of the way, I'm going to show you guys my cottagecore inspired lookbook. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed that video, and I really hope it was as informative as I tried to make it. If you did, please feel free to give it a thumbs up, and also feel free to subscribe to my channel. I look at LARP and other role-playing hobbies like D&D, fashion, and writing here, so if any of those interest you, please hit the subscribe button down below. I post weekly, and I hope to see you guys next week.